Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be covering the first of our 3 legendary weapon tier lists for Monument of Triumph, and that is of course going to be Primaries. Before we get started though, a couple notes, especially for those of you who have not seen tier lists, specifically legendary weapon tier lists from me before, so let's get started with those first. So first we have tiers aren't equal across tabs. That means that an S tier auto rifle is not necessarily equal in power or endgame viability to an S tier bow or an S tier SMG. But to be fair with you, I will make recommendations later, because it's not really fair if I say, oh, you know, this S tier auto, this S tier bow, this S tier sword, whatever it is, and then I don't tell you what I think is actually good, because maybe I think auto rifles are better than bows, and then I don't really, how are you supposed to know that if they're both just ranked S tier, right? They're both the same letter. And so toward the end of the video, I will make actual recommendations, or what I think are like the best primaries for you to be looking at potentially, on top of the stuff that we're going to be covering in this video, which I will cover notable examples of every weapon family, regardless of how good I think their S tier is, relatively speaking. And then if you're wondering how I actually make these tier lists, I basically do something like bubble sorting, if you're familiar with computer science, where I list out, let's say, every auto rifle in the game from top to bottom. And then I look at the top 2 options and I see, okay, which one do I think is better in endgame content? And if I need to swap them, I swap them. And we just go all the way down the list until you have something resembling like a power ranking. And then from there, you look and you find if there's any major gaps between 2 specific options. So maybe Auto Rifle 8 and Auto Rifle 9 on the list, you think there's a big power gap between these. Something is really holding back Auto Rifle 9 from joining the auto rifles in, 1 to 8. And so as a result, that might be your S tier. And then you continue to do that until you have more and more and more tier breaks, you have more and more major clusters of power. And then eventually you end up with maybe an F tier at the bottom or an E tier at the bottom. Which, also reminds me, some tier lists are going to end at C tier. Some of them are going to end at D. Some of them are going to end at F. It just depends on how many weapons are in that family. A lot of the time, newer weapon families, they don't have like a lot of weapons near the bottom of the tier list that are just completely terrible because they came out like 6 years ago, right? So as a result, just be aware that there are going to be different tiers in different tier lists here in different tabs. I will say one thing that's common though between all these tier lists is that don't be mistaken and think that only the stuff at the top of the S tier is usable. We're at a state in Destiny Sandbox where a lot of the weapons in this game are pretty good. They're pretty good. They're at least pretty good, at least usable. So S tier, A tier, B tier stuff, you're probably not trolling if you're using anything in these upper tiers. So don't worry too much about like the hyper specifics or even ordering within tiers. Don't worry too much. I would say though that there is on some of these tier lists a significant drop off once you reach like the C or the D tier. It becomes like very, very old weapons that you probably shouldn't be using, or weapons that were just like a mistake from Bungie that they should not have released in that state because they're just really, really terrible. But for the most part, a lot of these weapons are pretty viable, and I'm just going to recommend, the highlights. But you don't necessarily need to use those in order to succeed in endgame content. I think that goes without being said. Okay, another comment that I want to make here is that a lot of the mag perks on the weapons this season are going to be notably using high caliber rounds, alloy magazine, or seraph rounds. And this might be surprising to you guys because I used to recommend flared magwell on previous iterations of these tier lists in previous seasons. And part of the reason is that I think we're at a point in the Destiny Sandbox where a couple years ago, if you had no reload perks and you had no flared magwell and you had no reload masterwork, it was very noticeable. Your weapon was very sluggish. These days, with the advent of the weapon stat and you have like 100 weapons, you get a higher base reload and handling floor. And there's a lot of effects, even just outside of the weapon itself, that can give you some sort of reload, whether it's artifact mods or subclass stuff. And so as a result of this, it's really not that important. I would say weapons also ship with kind of more reload. At least it feels like. It feels like they ship with better stats these days. I don't know if that's statistically true, so maybe don't back me up on that. But it just feels like, reload perks in general, or just having reload stuff on your weapon is not as important anymore. And even when it is, with the change to alloy mag being working at the bottom 50% of your mag, and the fact that it's a reload duration scaler and not just base reload increase, means that no matter how high your reload is, it's going to be helpful to you. And so I think a lot of people would agree, a lot of people who are like primary enthusiasts would probably agree with me that alloy mag is probably the best general mag to run, even if you do want a reload boost on your weapons. And so that's why I've kind of switched fully over to alloy mag. On top of that, a lot of mags that do give you mag size increases like tac mag, app mag, extended mag, not only do these sometimes hinder your reload in the case of extended mag, but these also don't even increase your mag size significantly like the enhanced backup mag mod does. So if you really care about your mag size, or you're running a weapon type that is very, very sensitive to whatever mag stat you have, you're better off running enhanced backup mag and just running that and running like a solid mag perk like, alloy, which would help and stack on top of that, or run like high caliber rounds, which I'm going to talk about next. So what about high caliber rounds and seraph rounds? Why do I recommend them? And why do I recommend them specifically over stuff like armor piercing and ricochet? So we've done some testing on some of this stuff, especially because, Unstoppable Intrinsic is on a third of the weapon archetypes now. And so the reason why I think high caliber rounds is good is because in endgame content, we've done some testing on stagger thresholds and stuff like that. High caliber rounds basically just reduces the amount of damage you need to do to a target in order to stun it and make it stagger and stop shooting you. And so this stacks with the unstoppable intrinsic effect. It stacks with stuff like stopping power. And so in endgame content, I would say it's a more noticeable effect, a more impactful effect, I would say, than anything like armor piercing rounds or ricochet rounds or any sort of slight reload increase from flared or a slightly bigger mag from like tactical mag or appended mag, which you'll notice on a lot of weapons like hand cannons, for example, you're getting like +1, +2 in the mag. It's really not that noticeable. And so as a result, I do think if you're going to take a weapon and you don't really care that much about the mag size because it's already good enough, and you don't really care that much about alloy because the weapon, either you're reloading it through some sort of effect, or you don't need to reload it that often, or the reload is already plenty good enough, I would say high caliber rounds is something that a lot of people should consider, especially on certain weapons where maybe it stacks with the unstoppable intrinsic, especially when you're playing upper tier content where enemies are not just going to die instantly and you want to be able to stagger them a little bit, especially if you're using a primary. And so that's why I recommend high caliber rounds. Seraph rounds is kind of a shoo-in because it literally combines high caliber rounds, ricochet, and armor piercing into one perk. Some people ask, what about armor piercing rounds? Do I consider that as well? While I will say the over-penetrating effect of armor piercing rounds can help you trigger on-hit perks faster, like I believe it counts as multiple hits for attrition orbs, the likelihood of ads kind of lining up and you getting the armor piercing effect is kind of low, and I do think high cal is kind of just always active, and so I would recommend high cal a little bit more than stuff like armor piercing, but you're free to take armor piercing if that's something that you want to do. Okay, next up, you'll notice that destabilizing rounds of weapons on this tier list may have alternative perks listed underneath them that I wouldn't normally recommend, especially for weapons that are in upper tiers. So a perk like Rampage might be listed under destabilizing rounds, and you might be wondering why. And the reason is that there's an artifact mod called Volatile Flow in a pretty good artifact. And if you choose to take Volatile Flow, you're more than likely going to have volatile rounds all the time. And so if you don't need destabilizing rounds, you're free to change that perk on a void weapon to something else. You can run like Repulsor and Master of Arms, or Repulsor and Rampage. And then you kind of have 3 perks going at the same time because you have Volatile Flow providing you with the effect of destabilizing rounds. And so as a result, if you ever see any weapons with destabilizing rounds and you see some like suspicious perks underneath them, that's why they were added in, because I just wanted to present that alternative to people in case that's something they're interested in doing if they're taking Volatile Flow. My friend Spider pointed this out, and I thought it was a good point. And then the last 2 things I want to talk about is number 1, for champion intrinsic stuff, there is a concept that I'm going to mention in some of these notes here called double stagger. I kind of just made that up. But what I mean by double stagger is that the effect from high caliber rounds and the effect from the unstoppable intrinsic stack to lower the damage threshold even further for stunning targets. And since that's the case, if there is a weapon that has the unstoppable intrinsic and has access to high caliber rounds, and I think it's a good weapon archetype for taking advantage of this stagger effect, I'll write it in the notes, and maybe I'll increase it by a couple placements or something, depending on what it's nearby. Maybe that might push it over the edge versus a very similar perk pool weapon. We also have Barrier Pierce intrinsic. There are some archetypes in this game, specifically I would say precision archetypes in this game, that are mathematically inferior to some of their neighboring archetypes in terms of raw performance. But because they have the Barrier Pierce intrinsic, I'm willing to give them a little bit of leeway when it comes to ranking them in this tier list. So just be aware of that as well. And then finally, Elemental Supercharger working with exhausted targets. Technically, the Overload intrinsic on weapons applies a pseudo exhaust that doesn't actually decrease combatant damage output, but it counts as exhaust for specifically Elemental Supercharger. While you're not doing that on most primaries unless you happen to be on Tablet of Ruin and you're like, sure, I'll just farm super with it, there are some weapons that are specifically very good at farming super, and we're about to talk about one actually. I think it's like the only one that I've really pointed out. And to be honest with you, like the Overload is kind of like a passive thing there, to be honest, but I will point it out if it's something of note. I do think Overload intrinsic is probably the least impactful for most players when it comes to endgame content. And then finally, the last thing I want to point out, I know this has been a long intro, I'm sorry, but finally, the last thing I wanted to point out is I'm just going to be covering the highlights when it comes to this video, because I tried, this is like my 5th time recording this video, I tried covering every single primary, and it's just primaries, not even including specials or power, just the primaries. I tried covering every primary that changed in this update, and the video was on pace to be 4 hours by the time I finished auto rifles. And so I'm not going to be doing that. I'm just going to be covering highlights within elements, right? So for example, I'll try to cover the best stasis auto, the best strand auto, the best solar auto, because a lot of these auto rifles, a lot of the time you're picking the element of a weapon based on your build. I will make one point though, and that is that a lot of builds, even if you are running a stasis build, even if you are running a solar build, even if you are running some sort of arc build, it might still be better to run repulsor destabilizing rounds because of just how strong it is, right? Just to remind you, and this is before we get into things, because you're going to see a lot of repulsor destabilizing over the next hour or however long this video is. You're going to see a lot of that perk combo. And the reason is, for those of you who are not aware, destabilizing rounds is already just on its own an excellent splash perk, right? It doesn't require crit of any kind. It's just a kill. And then you get a bit of Volatile Splash, which I think Volatile Splash is one of the best splash effects in this game outside of like Flashover boosted Bolt Charge or straight up igniting a target, which no perk can just straight up ignite a target. Burning Ambition kind of can, but under certain circumstances. So yeah, like it's already a very good splash effect. And the cool thing is it transfers to your weapon. Your weapon gets Volatile Rounds, which allows you to instantly reapply that effect to the next target, which is very rare. It's very rare for these kind of splash effects to be on hit, let alone transferred from a previous target, and not something that you need to build up over time on every single target that you shoot, a la Kinetic Tremors or Jolting Feedback, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that Repulsor Brace is essentially a 0 cooldown, 150 effective HP. Here's a reminder, Heal Clip is 100 HP, right? Because it's Cure times 2. Repulsor Brace's Void Overshield, with its effective DR included, is an effective 150 HP overheal, not just a regular heal, an overheal on every single kill that works with destabilizing rounds. And every enemy you shoot should be volatile. It should be volatile. And so you can get this on literally every single kill. And so yeah, that's kind of why this self-sustaining loop of repulsor destabilizing is just so strong. It's the strongest perk combo, generally speaking, that we've ever gotten in this game for just raw ad clear plus survivability built in. And even though I'm going to be covering maybe like some solar auto rifles or like some strand auto rifles or some stasis auto rifles, just know that in a lot of cases, even if you're running a build or an artifact that matches like stasis or matches solar, a lot of the time the avoid auto is still going to be better. It's still going to be better just because of how strong this gameplay loop is. So I do want to point that out. And that is kind of the reason why the S tier is dominated by a lot of void weapons. And that's not even accounting for the fact that, yes, of course, we have insane artifact support for void as well. Void is probably the most supported element when it comes to primary gameplay, at least when it comes to artifact mods. So it's just absolutely insane support. And probably the element that needed it the least, because repulsor destabilizing, like I said, is already insanely strong with 0 artifact support. So yeah, anyways, let's go ahead and get started. Enough ranting. We're going to go ahead and get started with auto rifles. So auto rifles, you'll notice here I've bolded everything that I think is kind of worth talking about, even though it's not necessarily something I recommend for most cases. Just something that is maybe notable, like maybe like the best strand auto or something like that. So first on our list, we have No Hesitation. You'll see we have 3 support autos at the top here. Support autos they're already like pretty decent for ad clear, like their damage profile, despite the fact that they need to compromise because they are they have like multifunction, and Bungie made them, not the best damage profile on auto rifles, I assume for that reason. No Hesitation is the best of the 3 for 2 reasons. Number 1, Physic applies Restoration on solar support autos, and Restoration is easily the best effect to apply to both yourself and a teammate if they are in danger. So if you're literally using a support auto to try and save a teammate, you're going to want to pick No Hesitation over the others most likely. I mean, Void Overshield is also quite strong, like we mentioned when I was ranting about Repulsor Brace, but I would say Physic being on No Hesitation and not being on Cusp Sempiternal is kind of a big deal. The second thing is that it does have Dealer's Choice, and so Dealer's Choice is insane. It's an insane origin trait. It is the best super generating origin trait in the game and one of the best super generation sources in the game, period. If you're in 3 Dealer's Choice weapons and you get a kill, already gives you a huge chunk of super, but this effect additively stacks with the amount of super you get from Elemental Supercharger, which No Hesitation is an overload weapon, which accounts for Elemental Supercharger, and if you're on a solar super and use Elemental Supercharger with 3 Dealer's Choice weapons with No Hesitation, you can get an entire super essentially off of like 2 spawns of ads, which is insane. It's already found some use in speedrunning, it's already found some applications, and I'm sure as we move forward into the sandbox, people will find even more reasons to run Elemental Supercharger, especially specifically with this weapon. Okay, so that's No Hesitation. It also has Chaos Reshaped. I will note one thing about Chaos Reshaped. So the fate of Chaos Reshaped is a little bit hangs in the balance a little bit here. And so Chaos Reshaped, for those of you that don't know, is a very good perk, right? It's up to a 35% damage increase, and it gives you apparently a slow like 5 healing per second stackable effect. It used to be like 35 HP chunks like every 7 seconds. So it was like a little bit more sustained, but now I believe the way it works is it spreads the healing over time, and it just gives you a slow 5 HP per heal, 5 HP per second heal. Now, the problem is right now, apparently, in the last 35 HP of your health bar, so imagine your health bar is like this big bar, and at the top of it, when you're almost fully healed, that last 35 HP, Chaos Reshaped doesn't seem to know that that is part of your health bar. And so it stops any and all healing sources except for Chaos Reshape's extremely slow 5 HP per second tick rate above that level. So you're basically playing the game, as my friend Spider would put it, kind of missing 35 HP a lot of the time, which is, yeah, that's not great. I hope Chaos Reshape gets fixed. I think it's in the known issues or something, but I'm not 100% sure. But regardless, I've ranked weapons on this tier list with the assumption that Chaos Reshaped will get fixed. So yeah, that is kind of annoying. Yeah, second on our list, we have Cusp Sempiternal here. This thing has no Physic, like I mentioned. If it did have Physic, it might be rank 1. But it doesn't have Physic, and so the reason why it's this high is because, number one, Void Overshield is great. As a support auto effect to give to your teammate, it's pretty good. But second, it has Repulsor Destabilizing in case you want to use it for just regular ad clear while you're running around and also healing your teammates. And the big selling point for this one is that it has Withering Gaze. It's the only support auto with Withering Gaze. Which if you have a teammate whose role you've kind of forced into being like the damage buffer, so maybe they're like Assembler, Well Warlock, and you're playing in an optimized fire team and they're a Tractor and they tractor the boss, they swap to Galley, and they give everyone Galley, and they give everyone support auto. It means that this person can have a much more slot efficient support auto that can also debuff extend while giving their teammates a buff. So being able to debuff extend and give a 10% stackable damage boost to your teammates in the same weapon, I think is actually quite valuable. It is definitely very endgamey and very like optimization focused. I think it is a weapon that a lot of support-oriented players will gravitate toward just because it can cover all of these roles at the same time. Next, we have Decatur 02. Decatur 02 is actually kind of a shame because it has pretty good perks if it wasn't a support auto. For reference, I don't think there is another Crystalline Corpse Bloom Stasis auto. Stasis auto is one of the most neglected element types when it comes to literally any element and weapon family pairing, right? Because if you look at this Stasis auto, right, it's at rank 3. The next Stasis auto is down here. It's Intercalary at rank 32, right? Which is an insane gap to have between two of the same kind of like element plus weapon type pairing. So yeah, I mean, it's the only Crystalline Corpse Bloom auto. It has some decent stuff in the second column, but the main thing is, number one, is it has Physic, and Physic provides Frost Armor on Stasis support autos, which is pretty good. And, you know, with how Frost Armor now ticks down stack per stack instead of all at once, you can give your teammate 2 Frost Armor stacks per activation, and it has like a decent origin trait too and carry munition, so it's easily the best kinetic slot support auto, although its competition, Adamantite, not super great. And Adamantite, for those of you that don't know, it got Physic, and what Physic does on it is it releases an Unraveling Burst on you when you give the support auto frame boost to your teammate. So despite the fact that the Stasis support auto is capable of creating that defensive buff through Frost Armor, the Strand support auto, it does the Unraveling Burst thing instead of Woven Mail. I don't know, I guess Woven Mail is kind of a strong effect to proc instantly off of one activation, but still, I mean, that's kind of disappointing. So, I mean, the competition is not very strong. Next on the highlights here, we have Reckless Oracle. There's a ton of Repulsor Destabilizing Void autos in this game now, and all of them are like specialized in some small different ways, right? Like if you want a barrier option, you have Gnawing Hunger. If you want an option with like Mega Kill Clip and you're willing to drop destabilizing rounds and get it from the artifact, you want Accelerated Assault. You have Positive Outlook, which I've highlighted for that reason in particular. But I would say the best overall one, right? If you're not looking for anything in particular, is Reckless Oracle. Reckless Oracle, the Pantheon version, right? You have Destabilizing Rounds and Collective Demolition in the first slot if you want to drop Destab and run Volatile Flow. You have Chaos Reshaped, which a lot of people are combining with Destabilized Rounds because it's essentially a very strong single target damage perk. You have a little bit of Sustain, and then of course you have the Splash from Destabilizing Rounds as well. Elliptical Orbit from preliminary testing seems to be a pretty good origin trait as well for ammo generation. So yeah, I don't know, it's kind of the complete package. Reckless Oracle, if you want to use a Void auto, it's pretty good. Okay. Let's move down to the A tier here where we're going to cover some of the other elements. So if you want a solar auto, I do think Abyss Define is the best one. High Impact is one of the best auto archetypes in the game right now, minus the fact that it doesn't have barrier. It has high range, it has the second best damage profile if I'm not mistaken, and this one has access to double stagger because it has unstop and it has high caliber rounds. In addition, this thing also got Burning Ambition in the first column as a result of the new Monument of Triumph perks, and so if you want to use this with like Hellion or something, it's decent. I do think that Cursed Thrall is kind of awkward on longer range weapons because if you're playing with an auto rifle, you're playing with a scout rifle, you're playing with a pulse rifle, it kind of implies that you're kind of sitting back a little bit. And so that's not really what most melee builds tend to do. And if you're not getting melee kills, Cursed Thrall is basically a dead origin trait. So auto rifle, maybe not too bad, right? SMG, sidearm, auto rifle, not too bad, hand cannon. But once we move into like pulse rifles, once we move to like scout rifles, especially like Fang of Your Ute, it's kind of hard to argue that Cursed Thrall is like a really strong origin trait because you're not really getting melee kills if you're using a scout rifle from like 40 meters away, right? So that's something worth noting, I suppose. And then we have Scathelock and Pluperfect. Scathelock is interesting because it is essentially a Multi-Mach replacement, but it's an auto rifle. It has a much better damage profile than Multi-Mach. It has better artifact support than Multi-Mach. It has anti-barrier, which Multi-Mach doesn't have. And of course, it has Veteran's Wisdom as well, which is an excellent origin trait. Creates this like exhausting, staggering shockwave every time you meet a certain kill requirement. And so Scathelock, pretty good. The only thing with Scathelock that I'd like to mention is that it is a 600 RPM compared to Multi-Mach at 900 RPM. So it does produce orbs, I would say, fairly slowly compared to Multi-Mach. It's like a decent bit slower. But if you want something that's more of a gun than Multi-Mach and less of an orb generator than Multi-Mach, then Skadelock is probably a better choice. But again, a lot of people are basically just using Multimog to farm orbs, and so I kind of completely understand if they want to stick with using Multimog for that purpose specifically. We have Pluperfect, which is a triple stagger weapon, right? I think there's other weapons that get stopping power and have the unstoppable intrinsic and have high caliber rounds, but I think Pluperfect might be the best one of the bunch because it has the right range profile. It is kind of at the range where enemies can still shoot you, but you still want to stagger them. And it has stopping power, it has kinetic tremors in the second column. Post buff rampage is honestly pretty decent as well. And then you have fail deadly, which allows it to just have a much bigger effective mag size while you're trying to stagger enemies. So I think it's potentially interesting. I put in the A tier. It's not like S tier or anything. I don't think the effect is like world moving or anything like that. But it's an interesting choice. It's an interesting choice, and maybe you might want to try it. I don't know. Maybe if that's your speed, you might want to try it. We have VS Pyroelectric Propellant. I think a lot of people have approached me telling me that they love the Snipe Hunt Mark 47 because Snipe Hunt has jolting feedback, has chaos reshaped. I honestly think if you like Snipe Hunt a lot, I think you're going to like VS Pyroelectric Propellant even more because Bray Legacy is an insane origin trait. The adaptive frame is an even better frame than the SRL Auto's lightweight frame. And of course, it has attrition orbs and jolting feedback as well. So unless you specifically want jolting chaos like that combo, which I guess is kind of unique to Snipe Hunt, I think honestly VS Pyroelectric Propellant is the better pick. But if you like Snipe Hunt, I'm not going to stop you. I mean, that's also a pretty good auto as well. Like I mentioned, like everything in the A tier is going to be strong. It's going to be strong. I just think VS Pyro is like a little better overall. Another thing I'd like to point out is Chrysera Mellow. Something important about this support auto is that it is the only way of getting amplified without using any subclass effect or without relying on any multi-kills or without relying on kills like Xdearus does. And so it's like, I can see it being used in speedrunning somewhere. I don't think the actual weapon itself is very good, but I could definitely see it being used in speedrunning somewhere with Physic, just for specifically that purpose. Also, another thing, you may be wondering why Full Bore and Accurize are on every single support auto. Bungie made a change at some point that makes it so that the range of a support auto scales with the range that you can heal your teammates at. And I've used support autos with like Fluted and Alloy or like Fluted and like Flared or something compared with Full Bore Accurized, and support auto stat packages are good enough that the difference is essentially negligible. And so I think the increased range, I think I used it for like a certain speedrunning counter or something. I was trying to like heal a teammate from like far away for like whatever reason. And I definitely noticed the difference, I believe, at least. So that's why I run Full Bore Accurized. Because there's basically like no difference. And in terms of how you use a support auto, for the most part, it doesn't really change how the support auto functions, because most of the time with the support auto, you're kind of just using it to heal teammates and getting energy for the support auto from other damage, whether it's ability or weapon damage. And then finally, the last auto rifle I want to cover on this list is going to be the Forward Path. However, I will say Lethal Abundance and Rufus's Fury, all three of these auto rifles are basically the same in terms of power level. Some would argue Rufus's Fury better, some would argue Lethal Abundance is better. They're all kind of the same to me. And the reason why I want to point these out is because the artifact actually does have a fair amount of strand support. And so I can see if you're running like a strand build or something like that, maybe you're on Strand Warlock or something, I could see you wanting to use like a strand auto. And if you're going to use one, I think all three of these are pretty strong for, pretty much the same reasons. They all have access to Sever on hit through Slice. Some of them have Tear. You have like an extra splash perk in the second column. Rufus even has Chaos Reshaped. So they're all pretty good. These are all pretty good frames as well. I think Adaptive is obviously the best frame, but they're all pretty good. And then for stasis autos, I honestly don't even want to mention Intercalary. You might even just want to use Decatur and kill ads with Decatur because the perk difference between these is just that big. So, I mean, you can use Intercalary, but there's a reason I haven't bolded it. And I don't think any people on stasis builds are particularly sad that they are not using Intercalary and are instead using a different auto rifle. So yeah, that's it for auto rifles. Let's go ahead and move on to bows. Bows are a lot more straightforward. So bows, this is maybe like a risky S tier, like rank 1 pick, but I put Biting Winds in the S tier at rank 1 because of Bewildering Burst. Now, normally Bewildering Burst, the way it works, for those of you who are not aware, is you kill an enemy, and then the next time you reload your weapon, when you hit an enemy, a blinding missile will show up on the enemy that you hit, and it will blow up and blind everything nearby. Now, normally this is not very good on pretty much every single primary type because it's just not worth it with how often you reload primaries. Whereas with Biting Winds, because it's a bow, you're reloading every single time you shoot. And so because of bow lethality, especially with Argent Quiver, you're more than likely going to be one-shotting red bars. And this is basically a way of constantly keeping everything blinded that you're shooting. Now, you can argue that constantly blinding everything is maybe not that useful compared to like the increased lethality of like Headstone Firefly or Dragonfly Volt Shot on some of the bows below it. But I thought it was a pretty cool and unique effect. So I wanted to give it some praise. Maybe I'll move it down later. It's probably still S tier. But of course, it also has Kinetic Tremors, which is pretty good on a bow, procs very quickly. And then you have Winterized Gear, which is a battle origin trait. But at least the frame is good. We also have the Spiteful Fang, which is definitely the base stasis bow. It just has Headstone Firefly, which I think, I honestly think Headstone is like not that appealing on certain weapon types where it's kind of annoying to get crits like SMGs, especially like the higher fire rate SMGs. But on a bow, it's like perfect, right? So Headstone Firefly, excellent on a bow. Point of the Stag basically has the good non-denouement perks. It has Skulking Wolf instead of Collective Purpose, which is a better origin trait. It has less perk spread, but to be honest with you, a Volt Shot is what really makes non-denouement special, right? And so I don't really think you're going to be going Chaos Reshape or Mega Neura on this weapon. I just think Volt Shot is really what makes this bow special. I really wish they put Chaos Reshaped in the first column or Mega Neura in the first column. I think Mega Neura Volt Shot would be crazy. Even Chaos Reshape Volt Shot would be pretty crazy. So that's why it's below Point of the Stag in my opinion. And then finally, you have a couple other things here. You have Accrued Redemption, which is really good with Attrition Gambit if you want to do like the orb spam thing with Hierarchy. And then Attrition Kinetic is also fine as well. You have Fortunate Star, which I think of all the primary types, I think bows are maybe the weakest when it comes to abusing Void perks, just because Volatile requires you to shoot enemies kind of constantly to trigger the, Volatile explosion effect, whereas bows have a very low fire rate. And then, but Repulsor Destabilizing Bow is still pretty decent. It's also a lightweight, which kind of takes away from its score, in my opinion, a little bit. And then you have Hush if you want to do any sort of Scorch build, Burning Ambition, Incandescent. Pretty good. I do think Gun and Runs increase to your draw time on the bow is maybe a little bit more helpful than Wildcard. I honestly think in the past I've overrated Wildcard a little bit just because it has that internal cooldown. And like the little splash effect it does on the ground, it's not like super amazing or anything. So that's why I thought Hush might be like a little bit better in terms of just raw usability compared to Prius X4. And then finally, two more bows. We have Convened Recurve. Convened Recurve is basically if you just want a different frame bow that also has Repulsor Destabilizing. It has Accelerated Assault as well, which I would take over Vice Stinger. And so yeah, that's pretty much it for Void bows. I think high impact longbows and lightweights both suffer from different problems. And there might be some content where a high impact longbow is capable of one-shotting Red Bar and a lightweight isn't. So because of that, I would rate Convened Recurve as being like potentially a highlight as well. And then finally we have Vengeful Whisper. I do think Strand crit perks like Tear and Hatchling and also like to some degree Mega Neura do benefit a lot from being on a bow specifically. And so I think not putting this thing in the A tier would be like a little bit disingenuous. I think it's actually pretty good, even though Sundering is maybe not the best origin trait. And I know some people have pointed out like King Orfeo jolting pretty quickly with jolting feedback, but unfortunately I do think the first column is like a little too weak on King Orfeo for me to want to highlight it, especially compared to something like Point of the Stag. Okay, next up we have hand cannons. Hand cannons, very contentious. Lots of very good hand cannons in this game right now. We have the classic Void options in Kindled Orchid and Ironwood 03. Now, the reason why I haven't bolded Word of Crota is that adaptives and precision frames are essentially very similar when it comes to just, being a hand cannon, being useful. They're both barrier. They both have very similar damage profiles. I mean, I guess Kindled Orchid is like slightly more ammo gen. And you could argue that like Forge's Kin is like a slightly better origin trait compared to Curse Thrall if you're not running a melee build. And Kindled Orchid also has access to shoot to loot explosive payload, so it's kind of like a jack of all trades, really. It has Repulsor Destabilizing, solid origin trait, solid frame, and of course it has, some utility stuff in the form of shoot to loot explosive. And if you want to drop Destabilizing, you can also run Demoralize instead to have free weaken. So yeah, Kindled Orchid kind of just does it all. I think if you are a D2 player that's looking for like I say in the notes here, a traditional hand cannon that's not a spread shot or anything like weird like heat or dynamic or balance or anything like that, I think Kindled Orchid is probably the best pick. You have Ironwood 03, which I've actually heard a lot of people praising because Repulsor Destabilizing on a spread shot is unsurprisingly very good. And then you also have Collective Action for Void Breaches from the same artifact if you're running B-Flow. You can also run Surrounded, which is a high damage perk as well. And then Carry Ammunition is an excellent perk because the Insectoid Robot or whatever does actually quite a fair amount of damage. So Ironwood 03, yeah, just like, I don't know, if I was completely unbiased, I suppose, maybe it might even be rank 1. But I suppose it lacks barrier, and it's explicitly melee range, so it's a bit awkward. And then of course Word of Crota is kind of interesting because like if you're gonna be melee range, you might as well use Ironwood, right? And then I do think Ironwood is overall like a better weapon than Word of Crota in terms of damage profile, in terms of like perk availability. So I don't know. I think Word of Crota is still very good. Don't get me wrong. That's why it's top 3. But there's a reason it's not bold. Next, we have the modified B7 pistol, which I think the entire Destiny community agrees is the best kinetic slot hand cannon by a country mile. This thing has Firefly, Headstone, Accelerated Assault, one of the best frames for just raw minor DPS. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about it. You have Zali's Bane, the Pantheon version. I think the Pantheon version is a little bit better than the normal version. You have Firefly in the first column. That's like the main thing. And then Elliptical Orbit is arguably a better origin trait than Runneth Over as well. So, pretty solid. Obviously, Zali's Bane doesn't have any sort of sustain through like Heal Clip and Repulsor Brace, but I think most people would agree that Zali's just hits really hard with its perks. It's just like insane lethality on just both these perk columns. And so kind of have to give it some credit for that. I'll give it in the S tier just for that. And then Epochal Integration is basically like Zali's Bane with no Firefly in the first column and Heal Clip instead. And you have Nanotech Tracer Missiles, which is a better origin trait. So it's kind of a toss-up between these two. You can put one higher over the other, but they're both pretty good. And then you have Ayaz Luna. Ayaz Luna is basically just modified B7 pistol if you want specifically the barrier intrinsic. So I thought I would bold that as well. You have Corundum Hammer, which I think is the best kinetic slot, generally speaking, shoot to loot explosive payload hand cannon, because Firefly and Tear are pretty good in my opinion. Slice is also a good utility perk to have in like a low mana or a solo, for example, for applying courage to a boss, or severing a target to apply an elemental debuff. And so I think it has a little bit more utility than Vulpecula, but you can argue that a precision frame hand cannon is a better shoot to loot explosive option than a Corundum Hammer, and I wouldn't really disagree with you necessarily. So these are both pretty good. Unloved, I think, is also deserving of a shout out because it is maybe the best user of subjugation in terms of raw damage profile, because it is a heavy burst hand cannon after all. You do have double stagger in the form of unstoppable intrinsic and high caliber rounds. The perk options are maybe like a little bit disappointing, but I do think like Hatchling Tear isn't too bad, especially on like a strand build. So it is an option for sure if you want a strand option that's not like shoot to loot explosive payload specifically, and that's why I decided to highlight it. And then you have Nation of Beasts. Nation of Beasts, a lot of people have been praising this because of the gear shift jolting feedback combination. I believe jolting feedback received a change or buff semi-recently to make it so that when you're amplified and on specific weapon types, it takes a lot fewer hits in order to get a sort of jolt. I believe on hand cannons, I think it's like even 3 or 4 hits, so it's quite fast. And gear shift is a pretty solid perk to run for just raw damage on any sort of setup where you're getting amplified repeatedly through multi-kills or ascensioning or whatever. And the only shame about this is that obviously you don't have any sort of sustain on Nation of Beasts through heal clip or through like repulsor brace, and explosive pack is a pretty bad origin trait. But besides that, pretty good. That's about it for hand cannons. Let's go ahead and move on to pulse rifles. So pulse rifles, I don't necessarily recommend them on the whole, but let's go over the highlights at least. We have Joxer's Longsword, which has access to double stagger. It has shoot to loot, it has withering gaze, it has repulsor, it has destabilizing. You could replace destabilizing with kill clip if you really wanted to, if you are using V-flow. It has accelerated assault, so it has basically everything you could ask for on a pulse. I mean, the frame is good, you have double stagger, you have repulsor destabilizing, you have swap options, you have shoot to loot, you have withering gaze for debuff extension, you have accelerated assault. It has like literally everything you could ever want. I mean, you could argue that the origin trait could be better, or that the frame could be a different one if you don't like heavy burst, but you have to admit it has kind of everything. The next thing I bolded here is Nullify, just because it is the best solar pulse by quite a bit. It has heal clip for sustain. You have some good first column options for double splash. You have incandescent. You have Mega Neura. I think Firefly Mega Neura is pretty decent as well. You have Chaos Reshaped as an option. Firefly Chaos Reshaped is pretty good. The only downside here is obviously you don't have high caliber rounds, despite the fact that this is a heavy burst weapon, which would normally be able to have double stagger access. And then you have Collective Purpose, which the origin trait's not that great either. Down here we have High Tyrant. High Tyrant, I think, is the most lethal Void Pulse on this list if you're willing to use Volatile Flow for your destabilizing round source. And so you can run something like Repulsor Brace and Mega Neura, and this thing is absolutely lethal. I mean, effectively having 3 perks in the form of like Repulsor Brace, Mega Neura, and like Volatile Flow together is just like very, very lethal if you want to use a Pulse Rifle. That's a very strong splash perk combination, so that's why I bolded High Tyrant here. If you scroll down a little bit here, we have the Time War Inspired. This is Firefly and Headstone. I have heard that this Pulse Rifle has some stability issues, so you may want to invest in getting a roll with like Arrowhead or something like that. But just raw stat package wise, it is a rapid fire, which is one of the better Pulse Rifle frames. You have Firefly, Headstone, and Crystalline Corpse Plume in case you want a different sort of Stasis Crystal perk. You have Skulking Wolf as well, so that's kind of why I wrote probably as good as a Stasis Pulse gets. I mean, maybe you could argue that you would want a Heavy Burst instead to make it a little easier to hit your crits, but yeah, pretty good regardless. We have All or Nothing, which is a pretty solid pulse frame in the form of a dynamic, and it has Firefly, Tear, you have Slice in the first column as well, and you have Accelerated Assault, so just pretty solid perks all around the board. Certainly not one of the strongest weapons on this list or something I would recommend universally, but pretty good if you want specifically a Strand Pulse. And then I'd also like to point out Chattering Bone and Blast Furnace. Chattering Bone specifically, it has Elliptical Orbit, which is pretty good. It has Attrition Orbs Kinetic Tremors, which is pretty decent. You have Kill Clip Kinetic Tremors. You have sort of like this double perk action going on. It is a better frame, I would say, than Blast Furnace in the form of a lightweight. And I would say it does have a better origin trait as well. I'd say if you're willing to use a 4-burst pulse though, Blast Furnace is also really good, mostly because Kinetic Tremors and Chaos Reshape combined are really great. You have Splash combined with a really, really strong single target damage boost. You also have Indomitability as an option for an origin trait as well. I don't typically put 2 origin traits in every single cell here, so I'm just mentioning like Indomitability as an alternative if that's something you're interested in. The only shame here, I guess, is that, no high caliber rounds, despite this being an unstop intrinsic, so you can have like double stagger, but that's not the biggest deal in the world. And then finally, for pulse rifles, we have Oversoul Edict as our arc representative, which has Rolling Storm, a new perk added in Monument of Triumph, as well as Gear Shift, Jolting Feedback. So it's pretty interesting stuff from this pulse rifle. Maybe not the best user of Cursed Thrall, given the typical range that you use pulse rifles at. But I will say, I mean, you might think this is pretty good. Why isn't it in the S tier, or why isn't it higher? I mean, Rolling Storm, it's like double splash. Why isn't it higher? I'm going to say right now, a little rant here, but I do think Rolling Storm is one of the most overrated perks in D2 history. Compared to other splash perks that typically compete with it in the same column, Rolling Storm is kind of terrible, right? unless your build specifically functions off of Bolt Charge, which the main one is going to be Storm's Keep, which is perfectly capable of producing plenty of Bolt Charge on its own without the use of wasting a perk slot on just getting Bolt Charge. And Rolling Storm, compared to the payoff that you receive from every other splash perk in the game, whether we're talking Headstone, Crystalline Corpse Plume, Firefly, Meganeura, Tear, volatile rounds from like destabilizing rounds, you have Incandescent, like all of these perks, there is nothing that comes close to the delayed payoff that comes from Rolling Storm. And the Bolt Charge damage isn't even like a significant step up over other elemental effects, unless you boost it with Flashover, which I don't know, I mean, that's not really cheating, but like, it's not like the other splash effects, which are immediate, require any sort of boost to be pretty potent. And so Rolling Storm, I mean, it's technically positive in the first column, and I would take it over everything else in the first column on Oversoul Edict. So if you're wondering why I don't rate Rolling Storm as highly, or if you're wondering why I don't consider it to be like a full double splash perk when it comes to ranking weapons, that's kind of the reason. It's just definitely a cut below other splash perks, and I don't know why some people treat Rolling Storm as being up there with like Volt Shot or Jolting Feedback, or really any other, 3.0 splash perk. Okay, next up we have Scout Rifles. Now Scout Rifles, at rank 1 here, we have Vouchsafe. Vouchsafe, the only bad thing about Vouchsafe, I guess there's two bad things. The only bad things about Vouchsafe is that the frame could be better. Lightweight is the second worst scout frame. And Advanced Reflexes, while it did get a buff to increase your damage when you take damage upon ADSing, it's still not that great. So Vouchsafe, Repulsor Brace, Destabilizing Rounds Classic, you have Shoot to Loot Explosive Payload, you have Shoot to Loot Withering Gaze. This thing is just a jack of all trades. And I would argue it to be one of the better Void Scouts, even regardless of the utility perks that it packs as well. And so I ranked it as rank 1. We have Voltaic Shade. Voltaic Shade, originally I had it below Unworthy, but on second revisit, this thing procs Jolting Feedback, probably the fastest of any weapon in the game. And the double splash here, I think Meganeura is better than Firefly. I mean, just damage profile-wise it is, you just don't have the reload buff. And so Jolting Feedback Meganeura, very, very strong, very, very lethal perk combo. Balance Frame Scout is certainly not bad, and Imperial Allegiance is, I would say, significantly worse than Subjugation, but if you're just looking to use a Scout Rifle at range, and you want something that's very lethal, I do think Voltaic Shade fits that description a little bit better. However, I will say Unworthy, if you're like are plinking away for some reason, Subjugation is super, super excellent. And obviously Firefly's reload buff is a little bit helpful as well. So they're pretty close, but I do think Voltaic Shade takes the cake for me. You have Trusty, which I think is the best heal clip / solar sustain sort of scout rifle. It has heal clip access, it has reconstruction, which I would argue it actually isn't even that bad on Trusty. I don't like reconstruction on most primaries, but I think Trusty in particular I'm willing to make an exception for. Incandescent, Burning Ambition, Meganeura, classic solar perks. Brain Inheritance has a special interaction with Incandescent where all the Scorch ticks count as, I think, weapon damage or like damage ticks from the weapon for the purposes of the origin trait, so you can get a lot of ability regen from range using this weapon. So yeah, Trusty, I think it's pretty good. You have Doom of Chelchis or Doom of Kelkis or I don't know, something like that. This weapon is only let down by the fact that it is a precision frame, which is a significantly worse archetype than most other scout archetypes, and it has Runneth Over, which is not the best origin trait, not active a lot of the time, and there are just a lot of better origin traits that you'd rather take. Yeah, look at this thing's purple. It is Firefly Repulsor Brace if you decide to take B-Flow. If you don't need Overshield, you can run Destabilizing Rounds of Meganeura. So yeah, pretty crazy perks on Doom of Chelchis. And then finally, the last Void Scout that I want to talk about is actually Pointed Inquiry. Very interesting. So for those of you who did not watch the archetype video, high impact scouts actually are the best scout rifle archetype mathematically right now. And this thing has access to double stagger. It is Psycho Hack, which is excellent. And then you have Repulsor Brace, and you can run Demoralize, or you can run maybe Dragonfly, probably Demoralize. And then if this assumes you're getting V-Flow from the artifact. If you're getting V-Flow from the artifact, this thing, you can stagger an enemy very quickly because of double stagger. You have Psycho Hack, so you can exhaust the enemy and stop them from doing as much damage to you. And then it is technically the best archetype of scout rifle when it comes to just raw mathematical performance. And so if you can get over the RPM of a high impact being maybe something that's a little bit uncomfortable to use, this thing is actually pretty good. It's actually pretty good. It is a little artifact reliant. Next up, we have Fang of Irute. Fang of Irute is a rapid-fire Strand Scout. I just decided to highlight this because it has Terror Meganeura, which I think is pretty good. Curse Thrall is kind of a dead origin trait at the ranges that you tend to use Fang of Irute at. Yeah, pretty solid. I mean, like I would say like Terror Meganeura is better than like Firefly Terror here, but to be honest, Fang of Irute and the Scholar are pretty close together. If you're okay with using a high impact, the Scholar is, I think, fine as well. You have Hung Jury SR4. I don't actually recommend this weapon, to be honest, because it is a precision scout rifle, and the perks that it has, they're like pretty good. You can run like KT Firefly, KT Ancillary. I only pointed this out because it is like the Shoot to Loot Explosive Payload option in the kinetic slot for a scout rifle specifically, if you don't want to use a hand cannon for whatever reason. And then in the energy slot, if you want to Shoot to Loot Explosive Payload option, we have Nature Reclaimed, which is pretty good. It's a lightweight, not an amazing frame, but for quality of life, it's pretty good with Shoot to Loot Explosive Payload. And you have Heal Clip, Incandescent, and Skulking Wolf as well, which are certainly not bad perks either. And then next up, we have Sidearms. Sidearms, we have a decent amount of sidearms to talk about. In rank 1, I would say Compact Defender is excellent just because of its frame. Dynamic is a really, really solid frame. Very, very high 1 mag minor DPS. And then, of course, you have the classic Void combo with Accelerated Assault. Just an excellent and very lethal outlier when it comes to raw damage performance. But if you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of that damage performance, I would say Brass Attacks is a very, very, very close second. Heavy Burst is a pretty decent archetype. And then you have Unstoppable and High Caliber for that double stagger that I was talking about. You have Repulsor Brace, you have Destabilizing Rounds, and you have Land Tank, the return of Land Tank. Land Tank, for those of you that don't know, is an absolutely insane origin trait. It gives you a stackable 5% up to 3 stacks a DR every time you get a kill, and you can just stack it, keep it going. This origin trait is one of the best in the game for any sort of ad clear weapon. And of course, you can drop D-Stave and run like Repulsor Demoralize or Repulsor Rampage as well. So just really, really excellent. Honestly, with the way I'm talking about Brass Attacks, you might think it's rank 1. But honestly, they're really, really close together. You could trade these any day, and I think it'd be totally fine. 7 Seraph SI2, I know it's not bolded, but I think it's also pretty decent as well. Lightweight frame, a little bit worse than these two. It does have, Mega Neura and Surrounded as well if you want like that double splash effectiveness or like destabilizing with like a really strong single target damage perk. But I do think it's a little worse overall compared to Brass and Compact. You have Evening SI4, which is easily the best heal clip incandescent primary in the game. Excellent archetype here in the form of the Adaptive Burst, and then Accelerated Assault is never going to be an origin trait that you turn down. Insurmountable, despite being the worst archetype of Sidearm in the form of a Precision, it does have access to Attrition Orbs, which is kind of interesting, and Dark Ether Reaper. Attrition Orbs is really, really good on Sidearms. They dump their mags very, very quickly, if not even faster than SMGs, which people praise a lot for quick Attrition Orbs creation times. And then Dark Ether Reaper is an excellent origin trait to have on a primary. For those of you that are not aware of Dark Ether Reaper, go check it out. Go check it out on Compendium and you'll see what I mean. Another couple sidearms that I want to highlight in the A tier here. Anonymous Autumn is an Attrition Orbs, a lightweight sidearm. And this one I think is notable because it actually makes orbs faster than Multi-Mach. It makes them in 9 shots when it has a 14 mag. And I think generally speaking, when you're using this, you are very likely to create 1 orb per mag. And the amount of time that it takes to dump that mag really quickly and just get a quick reload off and use Volt Shot is pretty fast, honestly. So if this thing had more sustain, or if it was void, I think it would be definitely in the S tier. But it's definitely a little bit notable just because it can make orbs very quickly, just like Multi-Mach, and the damage profile is certainly better than Multi-Mach. So if you're looking for like an energy Multi-Mach equivalent, honestly, the more apt comparison might even be like Urtide Apex, because Urtide Apex is an Attrition Orbs SMG, people using the energy slot. And honestly, comparing the two, I mean, like the origin trait on Anonymous Autumn is certainly better. Field Tested is basically like a permanent reload buff if you're just playing the game and running around. Lightweight Sidearm has a better damage profile certainly than Lightweight SMG, and Volt Shot you can argue is more useful than some of the stuff in the Urtide Apex's second column. So if you're a Urtide Apex lover, maybe try out Anonymous Autumn. It's not too bad. I'm not going to say that Anonymous Autumn has Heal Clip, but if you're going to use Heal Clip instead of Attrition Orbs, you should just use the Solar Sidearm instead, which we've talked about already. We also have Empirical Evidence. If you're going to use a kinetic slot sidearm, this thing has Kinetic Tremors and Psycho Hack. Unfortunately, Bungie never progressed to the point of giving us a Kinetic Tremors sidearm that's like truly good. But Heavy Burst, not bad. High Caliber rounds, you can pair them for like that double stagger action I was talking about before. And then Enlightened Action in the first column. It's like not a terrible perk, right? You get a lot of reload off of this, but imagine if this was Attrition Orbs. I mean, this would easily be in the S tier, and it would be competing with the likes of Multi-Mach. So honestly, Empirical Evidence, not too bad, but obviously you're lacking in the first column a little bit, and that's what's preventing it from being really like a top tier pick. And then you also have Peace Bond. Peace Bond, not a particularly amazing weapon. Headstone is pretty decent. Skulking Wolf is a good origin trait. That second column is not particularly amazing, but it's mostly up here because of the adaptive burst frame that it has. It is anti-barrier, and it is mathematically the best or one of the best sidearm archetypes. And so I did want to point it out. If you want to use a Headstone sidearm, I would probably personally use Peace Bond over something like Liminal Vigil. And then if you scroll down a little bit in the B tier, if you want to use like a Strand sidearm, I would say Michael's Reference is a little bit better than Breachlight just because of its sheer ammo gen stat. And then you have Slice, of course, for proccing Severed stuff with the artifact. Hatchling is decent. Master of Arms is decent in the second column as well. So yeah, Michael's Reference, Rapid Fire Frame, 67 ammo gen, pretty solid. Finally, we have SMGs. SMGs. Okay. In the S tier on SMGs, I would say rank 1, Multi-Mach has been dethroned. I do think it is Unforgiven. Unforgiven has double stagger, so it is a worse archetype than a lightweight because aggressives have slightly lower and worse damage profiles than lightweights, but you have double stagger on an SMG, which is pretty good. Aggressive, unstoppable intrinsic, high caliber rounds, and then you have destabilizing rounds, repulsor brace, which is the classic combo, but you can also choose to run Attrition Orbs repulsor brace, and if you run V-Flow, you essentially have an Attrition Orbs repulsor brace, destabilizing, double stagger SMG, which is excellent. You can also run Destabilizing Rounds Chaos Reshaped. You can run Attrition Chaos Reshaped if you don't mind not having Repulsor as much, and you can get V-Flow from the artifact. And essentially you have a Yuletide Apex with a better Origin trait for reload uptime. I would say Bitterspite is a little bit better than Text Balance Stock in that regard. And then you also have Attrition Orbs with a slightly lower rate, but you have double stagger, and you have Void Synergy instead, which I would say is significantly better than what Yuletide Apex has to offer when it comes to survivability. Multi-Mock is still kind of in the same place. You have Attrition Orbs, Kinetic Tremors, classic with Skulking Wolf. You have Recluse, which I've noted here specifically because it's a lightweight. If you want a lightweight repulsor destabilizing SMG and you don't really care about Attrition Orbs, I would take this over Unforgiven. However, granted, if you're going to use a Void primary and you want repulsor destabilizing and you're not using Attrition, I'd probably just use a Sidearm instead. But I suppose it's notable to some degree. Bug Out Bag is basically just here because it's an adaptive frame which has the anti-barrier intrinsic, which none of these others have, so I thought I'd put one in the S tier that has that. I believe M17 Fast Talker is able to get 2 orbs per mag thanks to Accelerated Assault. It also is a pretty decent frame, and it also has access to Crystalline Corpse Plume instead of Kinetic Tremors, which has better stasis synergy, but Kinetic Tremors I would say is a little bit more universally applicable. And then you have Yuletide Apex, which I suppose is notable for being like an Attrition Orbs lightweight, but then again, Bug Out Bag also has the same RPM and is an Attrition Orbs weapon, and it's Void instead of Solar. So you can kind of argue that Yuletide Apex is kind of worse than Bug Out Bag in some ways. Yeah, that's definitely certainly an interesting thought, actually. I've never had that thought until now. Because I've always looked at Bug Out Bag as just being like the adaptive repulsor destabilizing option, but I just realized that as Attrition Orbs. I suppose, if Attrition Orbs was in the second column instead of the first column, I think Bug Out Bag would kind of strictly be better than Yuletide. But that's a discussion for another day. And then we have Submission. Submission, a lot of people have pointed out this thing has Kinetic Tremors and Chaos Reshaped, which is a completely unique perk combo to have on an SMG up until this point. It also has Soul Drinker, which is pretty good on an SMG for a bit of healing as well. So the way I look at Submission, it's kind of like a Multi-Mock if you don't care about orbs. It's just better for sustain overall compared to a Multi-Mock and just does more damage. And so that's kind of nice, although I would argue that if you're not running Attrition Orbs, if you're not running an SMG for Attrition Orbs, there are other archetypes on other families that I would argue are just better. And so, yeah, I don't know. Submission is kind of a preference-based thing, I suppose. And then finally, last but not least, we have Imminence. Imminence is a lightweight SMG, so the best frame. It has a solid ammo gen stat. And we have a bunch of perks here that are strand-related. We have Tear and Slice in the first column, Chaos Reshaped, Hatchling, and Firefly in the second column. Just a solid utility SMG all around. And if you're running like a strand build with artifact mods that benefit from like defeating severed targets, defeating unravel targets, then Imminence is pretty decent. So that is pretty much all I have to talk about when it comes to individual tier lists. Let's talk about what I actually recommend now. So when it comes to primaries in Destiny, I would say there are a couple families that are non-starters. I think pulse rifles are kind of non-starters. Auto rifles are strictly just better than them in the same range tier. I would say scout rifles are largely not very useful in the way people play in the modern sandbox, which is a lot more close to mid-range than it used to be. And then I would say SMGs are mostly just useful for attrition. And so as a result, auto rifles, I'm going to recommend, all 3 of these support autos are pretty good. If you want like a classic just energy slot, add clear auto, I think Reckless Oracle is pretty solid. Positive Outlook is like an interesting alternative that you can explore if you're willing to take V-Flow specifically. And then if you want a kinetic slot auto, I would say Scathe Lock is generally the best one. In the bow slot, bows are like, someone was asking me earlier when I would recommend bows over auto rifles. It's really a preference thing. Obviously, bows will drop off a lot in content where you can't one-shot red bars with crits, but that's not most content. I would say most content, even in some upper deltas, you can definitely still one-shot red bars with a crit, especially if you run Argent Quiver. And so, yeah, bows, you can run Spiteful Fang, you can run Biting Winds. It's kind of up to you, though. I think bows are for a specific type of player. And if you do play around bows, I think you won't really have any trouble deciding on what bow is best for you out of the ones that I've recommended here. So I'm not going to really mention too many names. But yeah, I've already bolded them and talked about the ones that I think are relevant. You have hand cannons. Hand cannons, despite not really having any specific artifact support, are still very strong. I think Kindled Orchid and Ironwood are definitely like my picks. And then Modified B7 Pistol if you want to use specifically a kinetic slot one. As much as, people love Zali's and Apocalypse integration, I do think the Void picks are kind of just better. They are kind of just better. Unless you're in content where you don't really benefit from the Void Overshield as much, in which case these are going to be a little bit more lethal and you can take a look at them. But yeah, these are mostly the picks for the most part. I would say Corundum Hammer is obviously useful for shoot to load explosive payload. So just getting like an energy slot, shoot to load explosive payload, Kindled Orchid, and then a kinetic slot, shoot to load explosive payload, Corundum Hammer for endgame content can be useful. But for the most part, I'm just going to recommend the stuff that's in the S tier. And then on pulses, we've already talked about this. I don't really recommend getting any pulses, to be honest with you. Scout rifles is kind of the same deal. You can maybe look at some shoot to load explosive payload stuff, and Voltaic Shade is kind of a standout. And maybe pointed inquiry is kind of like a standout when it comes to damage profiles and running V-flow, but I honestly still don't think they're that worth it, and they're kind of awkward to use at closer ranges. Sidearms, lots of good sidearms. I would say Compact Defender is great, Brass Attacks is great, Evening SI4 is great. If you want an attrition option, Insurmountable is pretty good. Those are the 4 big ones I'd be looking at. And then SMGs, I would say Unforgiven is kind of a standout, even though it is an SMG. If you want like an attrition orbs SMG, I think it's very solid. I think Bug Out Bag, honestly, now that I've realized that it has attrition orbs, is also pretty solid as well. You have Barrier Intrinsic, the frame is barely worse than a lightweight. Yeah, Bug Out Bag, I would definitely trade a Barrier Intrinsic for having like a slightly worse damage profile than your Tide Apex any day. And then of course it's Void, so you can get Void Overshield, you can get destabilizing volatile rounds from the artifact in 10 different ways. So yeah, pretty strong there. And then Multi-Mock, I mean, if you want to use Multi-Mock, you can still use Multi-Mock for generating orbs. Just know that there are other options out there like Everburning Blitz and Scathelock if you're willing to drop a little bit of orb generation for just a better weapon profile overall. I would say the vast majority of the other SMGs, even the ones that are bolded here, can be substituted by other weapons, a la sidearms, and maybe auto rifles as well. But that's, kind of up to you. So that's pretty much it for primaries. This was kind of a long talk, but I hope you guys enjoyed me kind of looking through all the new primaries that I think are potentially relevant within each element. I skipped over some of them, like, stasis, autos, stasis pulses didn't really get as much love, for example, because there's very few of them that I would consider to be endgame relevant. But yeah, that's pretty much it. There are a lot of auto rifles, a lot of bows, a lot of hand cannons that I didn't talk about that got new perks. And so if you're curious about those, definitely go check them out. But it's definitely not like sustainable for me to talk about all of them and every single change that has occurred. And yeah, that's about it for today. And for those of you who are waiting for the shopping list, that will definitely come out after I do a little bit of more exotic weapon testing. And once I'm done with that, we will certainly put together a shopping list, including where to get these things, as well as why you should be considering them. I will definitely make a slideshow, actually, shopping list, which I think will be quite appealing for a lot of people. Yeah, it'll be like a presentation that covers every single weapon role that endgame players should be looking to fill and what the best options in those roles are. That is pretty much it for this one, guys. I will see you probably in 2 days for the special tier list once I finish working on that. And after that will be the power tier list. I'll do exotic weapon testing. I'll probably do like an exotic weapon tier list. Perk and origin tier list will be updated because that needs some work as well. And then we will finish the shopping list. And yeah, so I'll see you guys around, and thanks for watching.